when I decided that it was time to write my second book, right, which was a few years after I wrote the first book, because the first book, like I said, was basically a concept. Can I write? And then having written it, I had other things that I was doing with my life, including nonfiction books. So then when I finally got to the point where I was like, I would like to write another novel, the idea behind that was like, and I would like to write a novel that I could sell. I literally went into a bookstore to see what was on the shelves, right? And what I saw was a lot of military science fiction. And so my brain was like, well, that must be what's selling, so maybe I should write that. These days, understanding about survivorship bias, I realized that I might have taken the wrong lesson from that I was seeing so much military science fiction because that is what was left after everything else was bought. But it was too late. I went ahead and did that. And for me, I was like, okay, so military science fiction, I'm going to write military science fiction. But one, it has to differentiate from other military science fiction. And second of all, it needed to be a story that I, as a reader, would want to read. And that's really important because I am a very, very fickle reader. If I'm not entertained almost immediately, I'm going to put it down because I'm 54 years old now and I'm that much closer to death every single day. And I don't want to waste my time on stuff that I don't want to watch or don't want to read or don't want to listen to. So I'll just put it down and start something else. But the person that I am the most critical about in this regard is me, right? If I'm writing and I'm bored with what I'm writing, how is anybody else going to feel about it? Because you're naturally inclined to like your own stuff, I think, or at least I am, right? So if I'm sitting here going, this is the worst, there's no possible way I'm going to subject anybody else to it. So I was thinking about the various ways of, how to do military science fiction in a sort of way that hasn't been done before. And it was just basically, I've always had this sort of casual observation that it would be really useful if wars were not fought by young people, because young people, you kill a young person, you don't just kill them, you kill their children, you kill their careers, you kill everything else that ever could have happened to them. Whereas if you had older people, I mean, no offense to us older people now, because now I'm 54, I qualify as vaguely older. But you've already had your kids, you've had your career, you've had that aspect of your life. So going to the part where you defend your children, defend your way of life, all that sort of stuff sort of made sense. Now, the problem is with old people is that physical decline happens. So it makes it more difficult, save in very desperate times, for old people to participate in the art of war. But that's the magic about science fiction, is you can find a way to do it. And so, and after that, it was just basically a really simple pitch, which is Starship Troopers with old people. One, I had a hook that I was interested in, which was the first thing. And the second thing is that I wasn't 100% with the idea that it's just all guns and tactics, right? That it does need to be about a person and about that person's journey through through basically their introduction to this whole new universe. And for me, I thought it would be interesting, and I thought it would be engaging to have a love story in there, right? And so right from the beginning, the love story was something that really sort of tracked. I opened the book not with an action scene and not with, here are the stakes, humanity is in danger or any of that sort of stuff, but with a man at the grave of his wife, right? Talking about his life experience living with her, his loneliness now that she was gone, his readiness to leave the earth because what he had cared about was already gone, all of that sort of stuff. And that was important for me to do it that way, not only because it hadn't been done in that way before, but because I needed to let the readers know that the story was about John Perry, and also to let people know that whatever they thought military science fiction was, this book was going to be a little bit different from that. You know, it was a good way to draw in people who wouldn't normally read a military science fiction book. Because if you start a book with a man mourning his wife, you know, I was crying when I wrote it because I have a spouse, I had been married to her at that point for like 7 years. And even after just 7 years of marriage, we're at 28 now, but even after 7 years of marriage, the idea of not living with her, or having to live beyond her was just, heart-wrenching. And so I wanted to actually sort of put that in right up the front so that people know that this is going to be a little bit different. So that's how I went ahead and did that. Now, the thing about Old Man's War was the whole thing was a fairy tale, right? From the thing of literally an editor from the largest publishing house of science fiction in the English language saying, I want to buy your book, to the very first review, which was the Publisher's Weekly review, which was a starred review that said this was like it was written from the hand of the master, Robert Heinlein himself, which was, at the time, just an incredible accolade, to it being nominated for the Hugo and me nominated for the Campbell Award for Best New Author. All of that just seemed incredibly surreal. And one of the things that I was very glad about was I was 35 when Old Man's War was published. And I had had enough of a career and enough of a creative life and enough of experience with the world that I was able to have perspective about it. And even though it was a surreal journey, I was also aware how lucky I was. So the way that the Android's Dream worked was when Tor came to me for Old Man's War and said, we would like to buy this book from you. And I was like, okay. And then they were like, well, actually, if we're going to buy one, let's buy two. Do you have another book that you can sell us? And I had Agent to the Stars, but they didn't want Agent to the Stars because they believed at the time that humorous science fiction was a difficult sell. So they're like, do you have anything else? And I didn't. So I said yes. And I sold the book. It was like with this pitch. It really literally was: man solves diplomatic crisis through the use of action scenes and snappy dialogue. And they were like, great, we'll buy that, right? Because they bought Old Man's War for $6,500. That was what my advance was, right? And so buying two books for $6,500 each, that was peanuts for them. So why not buy two, essentially for the price of one? And so Old Man's War became a success. They wanted the Ghost Brigades, they wanted the sequel. And I was like, well, what about this other book? And they were like, literally, we don't care. Whatever you want to write about whatever you want. And I was like, wow. And then I just basically took that as a challenge to just write just what I thought was essentially a Carl Hiaasen adventure in space. If you know Carl Hiaasen at all, the sort of absurdities of Florida that he sort of conveys. I wanted to create that sort of same vibe in a science fictional book. And so literally, I mean, I don't want to say that Tor didn't care about the book, but they were so much more focused on capitalizing on the Old Man's War universe that this book was they were like, finish it, it'll be fine. Whatever it is, it's going to be fine. And I was like, cool, I get to play. And that was great because the pressure was off, right? That they weren't looking at this book going, well, the first one didn't do great, so this is the one that's going to make you or break you, right? Old Man's War taking off just really took the pressure off what I was going to do for the sophomore book, especially since they wanted the sequel. So the sophomore book really was just literally, okay, well, here's this thing. It starts off by a guy farting an alien to death because you told me I could write about anything. Starter Villain, which is the novel basically that I describe as man inherits his mysterious uncle's supervillainy business. Chaos ensues. The thing that I have loved about Love, Death, and Robots is one, of course, that they asked me to do that at all, which I'm super, super happy about. But that they really do take what for me are often just very, very short pieces, like 1,500 words, 2,000 words, or something like that. And they just, in the space of 10 minutes or less, just put a whole different spin on them, right? And this is kind of the really cool thing of when you write, doesn't matter if you're writing a novel or novella, short story, whatever, you're usually doing it by yourself. You're usually in a room typing on a computer screen. That's all you got. But with Love, Death, and Robots, and with other sort of things, it's a collaborative process. And, I'm talking to animators, I'm talking to the director, I'm talking to the producer, Tim Miller, who heads up Blur Studios, which is supervising all of the stuff for Netflix, and who also is a director in his own right with the first Deadpool and the most recent Terminator movie. And just being part of that process has been super exciting for me, and also the fact that that animation, the animation really brings it to life in a wholly different way, and in ways you don't expect. Like, people loved the Three Robot shorts, right? Like, people have tattoos of the robots and stuff, and a lot of that is what I wrote, but as much, if not more, is the design of those robots, is the voice acting, is the way that the animators have animated the characters, the setting, all of that sort of stuff. It has given it a sort of scale that it otherwise wouldn't have had. And in the case of the Three Robots in particular, it's like I wrote that story in like 45 minutes because an editor of Anthology was like, I'm going to keep poking you until you actually give me something. I'm like, fine, here, blah, 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 blah. And the fact that from that basically 45 minutes of me being just silly has become as part of an Emmy-winning, incredibly popular series of that has really sort of advanced the art of animation. It just tickles me. Again, I've had incredible luck in this career, and that's just another example of that.